Okay, so back to my conversation about Israel and why they likely made it a nation in 1948. Is that they made Israel a nation so that they could have a nation of God's people. See, they say America is a godly nation as well, but they gave Israel its own nation because they have a covenant with God, where the United States is basically a country based on that. Based on the Old Testament, or possibly, I would venture to say mostly the Old Testament. So they do have a connection, and if I'm not mistaken, the monarch in England, or the UK, Great Britain, is also a religious, some type of construct. They claim some sort of divine right. I'm not sure what that is, but I don't question that also may have some relevance to what's going on, as do most of these countries have some connections to the God of the Old Testament. Most countries have that, at least that. And now they have connections also to the Quran through immigration. Their recent immigration, a great deal of their population now are Islamic. So the only nation that's actually been and still may claim to be God's people are Israel. And that, I don't question, is why they support Israel. Because the Christian people do not have a nation. They don't have land of their own. They don't have land that's been set aside for them specifically. And the Israelites do. So what has been taking place is that these countries who very much honor, the rule of law and that sort of thing, official documents may be going along with this nation of Israel as being a legitimate nation of God's people. And the one thing that goes along with that is the Old Testament, the Hebraic law. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, the Ten Commandments, and also the punishments if you harm God's people go along with the Old Covenant. And those punishments were, in some cases, quite harsh. And so with the countries who seem to be standing by Israel for reasons of official evidence concerning their right to exist and their right to be called God's people, they may be doing so because the Christians do not have that. The Christians do not have a nation for themselves. And they also do not have a leader for themselves, which is who I am. I am that leader. And that is why they persecute me. Israel, since it does have the documentation historically, and a variety of artifacts that may back that up, they're given this official status of God's people and God's land and God's people's land, where, like I said, they don't, I'm the leader of the Christians and they don't let me even have access to much of anything, not even health. They're destroying. I live in a horrible place that's killing me every day, and they force me to live there because they don't, and they know they keep these places running so that they can use them for, you know, whatever purpose they see fit. Typically, you know, the less deadly apartments maybe go to people they don't really have a problem with, but they also don't care if they live or die, you know, because they aren't emotionally attached to other human beings, a lot of them. They're just doing jobs and living their life and going through some sort of a journey, in my opinion, from what it looks like. But then they have apartments that they're very deadly, and they seem to give those to the people. And look, there's another one, 664. I just mentioned back there, the first and only license plate I looked at was 64. And that's the year I was born. And this one is 664. I don't want to show you the license plate because it's somebody's, but it's take my word for it. That's the only other one I looked at. And that's the month and year I was born. And like I say, 9 and 6 are basically the same symbol. I don't differentiate between those. Only if I'm counting or it's used mathematically do I give it that numeric property. But so I was getting to the point where, you know, I really want to stress that they have not let me have my what's rightfully mine. They've usurped me basically in order to run things the way that they assume that I would. Or maybe don't even assume that I would, but they'll run things the way they want to in my place. So now I will get back to what I was saying about Israel and why they may have gave it its own, why they may have given the Jews their own country back in 1948. So, as I was saying about Israel getting their own country, I don't question they did that so that they would be able to also use Israel and God's wrath to punish people that they may want dealt with. Because, you know, the old saying is, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And they know that these old cultures actually live by the sword still. And even if they wanted diplomacy, there may not be any diplomatic people in that land, in that encounter, which is why they don't want me to be allowed to represent the Christians or God's people and keep me from having a land of any kind, even a home to call my own. They don't want me to have any of that, from what it appears. And that way they can still maintain Israel is God's land. And the Jews are God's people. But I am God's chosen, and I am the leader of the Christians. And they have done great harm to me in keeping that from going forward. And they're doing great harm to me to keep that from going forward. So that's what it's basically all about. They don't want the number one Christian. They don't want Christ's envoy, which is what I have on my placard that I made up for my backpack or for hanging on things, or ambassador or anything related to that position. They don't seem to want that to come to fruition. And I've shown it in my blogs that there's collusion between these people. I show evidence that there's likely a coordinated effort on behalf of many of these groups to maintain and upkeep my persecution and worse because of that, because I am God's chosen. And as God's chosen, that if I am able to lead in that capacity, I don't say they know, but I'll say I don't question that they may consider that if I am able to lead in that capacity, that they may they may not fare too well. So basically, that's basically what it's about. It's about promoting the country and the people, established people of God. And that at the moment are basically Israelis, Jews in the land of Israel. Because they have the documents, they have the historical artifacts allegedly that verify it, and so that's what they're going on. I'll say I don't question they know that I am who I say I am. They just don't want anybody else to know, in my opinion. Having Israel as a nation under the old covenant, which is still basically eye for an eye, and you live by the sword, you die by the sword type Old Testament Hebronic law, then there is no challenger that's been established on any land, because they claim to own this land. They claim to, anybody in this land is subject to them, which may be why they've never let me leave it. They've permanently, which I've attempted to do multiple times. And so, not that may have not also garnered resistance from other countries that support the United States, because I don't question that's why they denied my applications, was because it was in support of the United States, who did not want me to establish myself anywhere. And so now that they're giving that title to Israel, which is rightfully mine, I am the leader of the Christians. I am the leader of God's chosen people. I am the leader of God's real people, not the leader of the Jews who rejected Christ and still reject Christ. I'm the leader of the real Christians and the real believers and the real servants of God and children of God. And that's something that they refuse to, they seemingly attempt to excuse themselves out of having to confront that issue. As Jesus mentioned, there shall be wars and rumors of wars, and earthquakes in divers places, and such things they'll discuss rather than discussing what they're doing to me to keep me away from my rightful place. But he said the end is not yet. But it's coming. You know, I'm likely going to be in charge. And hopefully I will post this, or I'll post some content that I've already accumulated to kind of equal it, kind of cover what I'm saying. But if I'm not mistaken, this is the only content today that I've mentioned Israel as a country given to them so that they could be this land of God's people that other nations could pay homage to and allow their blessings for what they may be also interested in accomplishing. And that's why I mentioned that as being the number one Christian, and they've known me for many, many years. And that's, supported by evidence on my blogs of signs and wonders that I do and that I've mentioned and posted, that I've videoed, recorded. So those are there for that purpose. Now it's time to move on. Now it's time to just accept that I'm who I say I am, and do what has to be done.